It's still painful to remember that day when everything changed in my life, a day that taught my unfaithful husband Keith and his mistress an unforgettable lesson. Keith's phone vibrated on the table, catching my attention like a warning bell in the quiet kitchen. It wasn't unusual for him to leave his phone lying around, but lately, he had been carrying it everywhere, guarding it like a precious secret. Something inside me whispered, "You need to check," and with trembling hands that betrayed my fear, I picked up his phone. The notification on the screen drew my eyes like a moth to flame. Though it was from an unnamed number, the message stopped my heart cold. "I miss you, can't wait until tomorrow," the words burned into my mind like a brand. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird, and the room began to spin around me. I desperately wanted to believe it was some mistake, but the words were too intimate, too personal to deny. Just as my thoughts were spiraling into darkness, my daughter Amelia's sweet voice cut through my panic as she entered the kitchen. She asked about dinner in her innocent voice, unaware that her mother's world was crumbling like a house of cards. I tried to smile, but it felt like trying to hold up the sky as everything crashed down around me. I managed to answer her, "Soon, sweetheart," while desperately trying to contain the storm raging inside me. Throughout dinner, Keith acted as if nothing was wrong, talking with the children, smiling, even winking at me occasionally. What used to be gestures of our comfortable intimacy now felt like daggers in my stomach, each word and movement a painful reminder of his betrayal. After the children went to bed, I knew I had to confront what I had seen. With my heart pounding like a war drum, I walked to his study where he always worked after dinner. When I opened the door, he was focused on his computer screen, just like any other evening. "We need to talk," I said, trying to keep my voice steady despite the tremor I felt in every nerve. Keith looked up with feigned surprise, asking what was wrong without even looking away from his monitor. I took a deep breath, gathering courage like armor around my heart. "Who is she?" I asked, the words falling like lead between us. Silence filled the room like thick fog. Keith slowly raised his head, his face a mixture of shock and tension that told me everything before he even spoke. For what felt like an eternity, our eyes locked in a silent battle. He tried to deny it, saying he didn't know what I was talking about, but his voice betrayed his guilt. "I saw your phone, I saw the message, stop lying to me," I demanded, feeling years of anger suddenly burst forth. His expression changed as realization dawned, but instead of remorse, darkness clouded his eyes. "Fine, her name is Allison," he said coldly, his words falling like stones into my heart. "It started as nothing, but now it's different." I couldn't believe what I was hearing, couldn't believe this was happening to me, after 20 years of marriage. I fought back tears, refusing to show any weakness in front of him. The man standing before me was a stranger, though I thought I had known him for all these years. "What do you mean by different?" My voice came out as barely a whisper, trembling with fear and disbelief. Keith sighed impatiently, rose from his chair, and walked to the window, deliberately avoiding my gaze. His words cut through me like a knife when he said he was with Allison now, that she understood him in ways I never could, and that we should end things. My world shattered into a million pieces right there in that moment. Everything we had built together over years of marriage, all our struggles and sacrifices for our family, was being destroyed for his temporary affair. His voice was devoid of any guilt, cold and matter-of-fact, as if destroying our family was the most natural thing in the world. "How will you explain this to the children?" I asked, my voice quivering with emotion. He coldly informed me that he and Allison had already discussed everything. They would sell the house, give me my share, and build something better together. His cynical words finally broke the dam of tears I had been holding back. "I can't believe this," I whispered to myself, not to him. "All we've built together, all the time we've shared, and you can dismiss it so callously." Keith glanced at me for a moment, but my words seemed to mean nothing to him. He had the audacity to say this was best for everyone. With a casual shrug, he added that I would understand soon enough. I felt like I couldn't breathe, like the air had been sucked out of the room. True, our marriage wasn't perfect, but I never imagined it would end like this. It was the end of life as I knew it. That night, sleep eluded me completely. Keith's words echoed in my head like a cruel symphony, tearing my heart to pieces. Every corner of our home held memories, the joy, the struggles, the promises we made, now all seemed hollow and meaningless. I knew I couldn't just sit there and do nothing. Deep inside, I felt certain this was just the beginning, and the storm Keith had unleashed wouldn't blow over easily.
While Elizabeth was lost in her thoughts, Keith and Allison were plotting their next move in a dimly lit corner of a quiet cafe, hidden from prying eyes. Like a spider weaving her web, Allison had meticulously studied Keith's financial situation, calculating every possible way to maximize their gain. Her ambitious nature burned with determination, unwilling to let this golden opportunity slip through her fingers. "This is our perfect moment," Allison whispered seductively, sliding the documents across the table. "If we play our cards right, Elizabeth won't suspect a thing until everything's been liquidated and safely in our hands." Keith hung on her every word, mesmerized by the promise of escape she represented. To him, Allison was the beacon of hope, a dazzling escape from the mundane life he shared with Elizabeth. He was willing to sacrifice everything, his marriage, his reputation, his past, for the intoxicating future this younger woman dangled before him. "What if Elizabeth catches on?" Keith asked, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his handsome features. A calculating smile played across Allison's perfectly painted lips. "She won't, darling," Allison purred, her confidence as smooth as aged whiskey. "That woman trusts you blindly. We'll transfer the assets at just the right moment, put everything in our names, and by the time the divorce is final, you'll have everything you deserve." Keith felt relief wash over him like a warm summer breeze. Though the prospect of losing everything had haunted him, Allison's unwavering confidence acted like a balm to his troubled soul. "Let's do it then, there's no turning back now," he declared, sealing their fate. Allison gazed at him with triumphant satisfaction, knowing she had him completely under her spell. For her, this was more than just a game of hearts, it was a calculated victory she intended to win at any cost.
While Keith and Allison were plotting, I was at home trying to piece myself back together, unaware of their secret meetings. Sitting before my computer, I steeled myself to investigate our family's financial situation, my hands trembling slightly as I logged in. Keith's suspicious behavior had planted seeds of doubt in my mind, and I needed to know if he was hiding anything else from me. My heart grew heavier with each click as I went through our bank accounts and property records, like walking through a darkening tunnel. The numbers didn't add up, sending chills down my spine. There were recent transactions I had never approved, appearing like red flags in our once shared financial landscape. I discovered mysterious transfers to unknown accounts and documents that revealed something sinister brewing beneath the surface. Though panic threatened to overwhelm me like a tidal wave, I realized Keith wasn't just planning to be with Allison, he had orchestrated something far more devastating. I knew I needed to act quickly, but the magnitude of this betrayal left me feeling like a small boat in a vast, stormy ocean. I couldn't face this alone, the weight was too heavy for one person to bear. I needed help, and I knew exactly who to turn to, though the thought filled me with apprehension. My mother-in-law, Sharon, a pillar of strength in our family. Though she could sometimes seem cold and distant, I knew in my heart that she loved her grandchildren fiercely and would do anything to protect them. Without hesitation, I decided to visit her the next day, gathering what courage I had left. Though uncertain of her reaction, I felt in my bones that I needed her support to confront Keith. When I arrived at Sharon's house, my nerves were stretched tight as piano wire. Though worried she might take her son's side, I knew facing Keith alone wasn't an option anymore. I knocked on her door, my heart drumming against my ribs like a caged bird. When she opened the door, my face must have told her everything before I could speak a word. She ushered me inside without hesitation, her maternal instincts clearly awakened by my distress. Sharon asked me what was wrong, her voice filled with concern as she read the anguish on my face. Through my tears, I poured out everything: Keith's betrayal, the suspicious account activity, all of it tumbling out like a dam breaking. Sharon listened intently, absorbing each word as if weighing them carefully in her mind. At first, shock registered on her face as the reality of her son's actions sank in. She told me not to worry, her calm voice masking the storm I could see building in her eyes. She assured me that Keith wouldn't get away with this. Surprised by her response, I asked her what she meant, wiping away tears with trembling hands. She rose and walked to her desk, pulling out documents she'd kept for years. She explained that everything Keith was trying to claim was actually under her control. She promised to transfer everything into my name, declaring that she wouldn't let her son's selfish decisions destroy me or make her grandchildren suffer. Her words sparked a tiny flame of hope in my heart, the first I'd felt in what seemed like forever. Though many challenges lay ahead, I knew I wasn't alone in this battle anymore. The morning sunlight streamed through the windows, but I barely noticed it, lost in my thoughts like a ship in foggy waters. I sat at the dining table, an untouched cup of coffee growing cold before me. The papers Sharon had given me were spread across the table, each document representing both a step toward protecting my children's future and a testament to the end of my marriage. My heart was heavy with a complicated mixture of loss and relief, like waves of different temperatures meeting in an ocean. Sharon entered the living room with purposeful steps, clutching another file in her hands. She wasn't like the stereotypical mother-in-law, she was strong, independent, and rarely showed her emotions, like a steady lighthouse in a storm. But that morning, I saw a different side of her, that I'd never expected. She had become my unexpected ally, ready to do whatever necessary to protect our family. Sharon told me everything was now in place as she set the file in front of me. She assured me that Keith wouldn't be able to touch a penny of what was rightfully ours. I stared at the documents, my heart swelling with a mixture of gratitude and relief that threatened to overflow. Never in my wildest dreams had I imagined ending up in this situation, let alone receiving such steadfast support from Sharon. Yet this support had become my lifeline, as essential as breathing. With Keith and Allison plotting to take everything, I couldn't afford to lose it all. My voice trembled with emotion as I told Sharon I didn't know how to thank her, the weight of the past few days evident in every word. I admitted that I never expected her to react this way, to stand so firmly by my side. Sharon kept her eyes on the documents, a ghost of a smile playing on her lips. She told me quietly but firmly that her son had lost his way. She explained that she couldn't support him because she knew firsthand what it was like to lose everything to a selfish man, and she wouldn't let her grandchildren experience the same pain. Her words struck a chord deep within my heart. Though I knew little about my mother-in-law's past, in that moment I realized she too had fought her own battles in life. This shared experience had connected us in ways I never could have predicted. As our plan progressed, Sharon and I moved quickly into action. We had to sign all the documents and secure the assets before it was too late. Everything needed to be in order before Keith could make his move. The days whirled past like autumn leaves in a storm, filled with paperwork, meetings with lawyers, and countless decisions. Though I was emotionally exhausted, like a marathon runner on their last mile, I knew I had to keep moving forward.
Meanwhile, Keith remained blissfully unaware of the plans unfolding against him, convinced his scheme with Allison was proceeding perfectly. In his mind's eye, he saw himself cutting ties with Elizabeth and starting a new life with his young mistress, as if orchestrating a grand romantic escape. One evening, as they dined in Allison's sleek downtown apartment, Keith raised his crystal wine glass and declared with smug confidence that everything would soon be theirs. The air between them crackled with a false sense of trust and triumph, their victory seeming as tangible as the expensive silverware that graced their table. Yes, Allison purred, her calculated smile gleaming like a cat who had spotted its prey. Elizabeth suspects nothing, she added with a hint of cruel satisfaction in her voice. Keith took another sip of his aged Bordeaux, his gaze drifting to the city lights twinkling beyond the window like promises of their future together. He felt certain that soon he would be free from the shackles of family responsibility, ready to embrace what he believed would be a more exciting chapter of his life. But his confidence was nothing more than a beautiful illusion, as fragile as a soap bubble floating in the evening air. Reality was preparing to strike with the force of a sudden storm, and Keith had no idea he was standing directly in its path.
At home, I struggled to maintain my composure in front of the children, like a performer keeping a brave face on stage. I had decided not to tell them anything yet, praying I could resolve everything before they sensed the shifting sands beneath our family's foundation. Amelia and Lucas were my anchors in this storm, and I drew strength from their innocent love, determined to stay strong for them. One afternoon, while helping with homework, Amelia's question pierced my heart like an arrow. She asked why Daddy wasn't home much anymore, her young voice filled with confusion and worry. I paused, searching carefully for words that wouldn't plant seeds of anxiety in my daughter's heart. Finally, forcing a smile that felt like lifting weights, I told her Daddy was just busy with work. I assured her everything would be fine, though the words felt hollow in my mouth. Though young, Amelia seemed to sense something was amiss, her eyes reflecting a concern that tore at my soul. I knew eventually, I would have to tell the children the truth, but this wasn't the right time, like fruit picked before it's ripe. First, I needed to secure everything, to build a fortress around what remained of our life. As days passed, my relationship with Sharon grew stronger, like a flower breaking through concrete. Where once we had only exchanged pleasantries, we now stood united in our mission to protect our family. One afternoon at the notary's office, while reviewing the final documents, Sharon confidently told me everything was going according to plan. She added that once this was official, Keith would have no options left. I nodded, feeling the weight of it all pressing down on my shoulders. Though the pressure still felt overwhelming, I could sense the court date approaching like an oncoming storm. Sharon's plan offered legal protection, but I knew a confrontation with Keith was inevitable, like two trains on the same track. While I hadn't fully processed his betrayal, at least I no longer felt alone in this battle. That night, as I prepared for bed, I studied my reflection in the mirror, barely recognizing the woman staring back at me. Though the pain of betrayal remained sharp and fresh, something deep within me had shifted, like tectonic plates beneath the earth's surface. I was no longer the meek woman Keith had underestimated. Now I felt a strength within me that could face anything, like steel forged in fire. With these thoughts, I turned off the lights and lay down in bed. Knowing the court date was approaching, I felt ready to face it without fear, like a warrior preparing for battle. The days flew by like autumn leaves in the wind as the trial drew closer. Though Sharon and I worked tirelessly to protect what remained of my marriage, the emotional wounds still felt raw and open. Keith's betrayal had not only shattered my trust, but had reduced everything we once shared to dust. The house felt charged with tension, like the air before a thunderstorm. Keith continued coming and going as if nothing had changed, showing no remorse and maintaining his cold, distant attitude. His behavior infuriated me, but I fought to stay calm in front of the children, like a duck appearing serene while paddling furiously beneath the surface. Each day was a new battle in my heart, but I knew I had to stay strong until the trial. One morning, while reviewing legal documents with my lawyer, I felt completely overwhelmed, like waves crashing over me. It wasn't just the upcoming trial weighing on me, it was everything that had happened, pressing down on my shoulders like a heavy blanket. The lies, the humiliation, the uncertainty, they all swirled around me like a dark fog. I knew this battle wouldn't just be fought in the courtroom, but in the depths of my heart as well. The thought of facing Keith in public, of laying bare my pain before the judge, terrified me, and I didn't know how to prepare myself for that moment. That afternoon, Sharon came to visit me, her face etched with concern like a mother watching over her child. As my mother-in-law sat on the living room sofa, I could see in her eyes that she understood the toll this ordeal had taken on me. Though our relationship hadn't always been perfect, she now praised my courage with a warmth I'd never expected. Sharon looked at me with worried eyes, telling me how exhausted I appeared. She added that she understood how difficult this had all been for me. I sighed deeply, feeling the weight of her words settle over me, like a heavy shawl. My exhaustion wasn't just physical, it ran deeper, seeping into my very soul. I admitted to her that it felt like being in an endless war, where each day brought a new battle. Even with the support of my lawyers and her help, I confessed that I felt like I'd lost a part of myself along the way. Sharon leaned forward and gently placed her hand on my arm, her touch warm and comforting like a mother's embrace. She softly reminded me that the most important thing was protecting the children. This wasn't just about money or myself, she said, but about the children and staying strong for them. Her words rang through my heart like a clear bell, and I knew she was right. Though the situation was painful, my children needed their mother to be strong, like a lighthouse in their storm. In all this chaos, they needed someone to guide them through the darkness ahead.
As the trial drew near, Keith and Allison continued their dance of deception, like actors in a tragic play unaware of their impending downfall. Elizabeth watched their interactions from afar, her heart heavy with the knowledge of what was to come, like a spectator at a Greek tragedy. Fate seemed to be playing a cruel game with them, weaving an intricate web of consequences they couldn't yet see. Allison radiated the confident glow of a woman who believed victory was already hers, blind to the storm clouds gathering on her horizon. Keith, too, basked in the warmth of his imagined future, convinced he would soon shed Elizabeth like an old coat and begin a new life free from family obligations. What Allison didn't know, however, was that Sharon had already orchestrated their downfall with the precision of a master chess player, setting every piece in perfect position.
While Keith and Allison believed they held all the cards, my legal team and I had already secured most of the assets, like pieces moved silently on a chessboard. Our plan was proceeding perfectly, and soon the truth would come to light in court. One afternoon, while picking up the children from school, I felt butterflies dancing in my stomach, making me queasy with anticipation. I knew I would soon have to face Keith in court, and the thought weighed heavily on my mind like a stone. Though I was prepared, an undercurrent of anxiety refused to leave my chest, flowing through me like a restless river. My youngest, Lucas, sensed my tension and asked if I was all right, his innocent voice full of concern. I caught his worried eyes in the rearview mirror and forced a smile, trying to project calm I didn't feel. I told him I was just tired, but I knew this exhaustion ran deeper than mere fatigue. It was the weight of upcoming confrontation and fear of the unknown. That night, after tucking the children into bed, I sat alone in the living room, surrounded by silence. The emptiness of the house pressed in on me, from all sides, like invisible walls closing in. While Keith was out with Allison, I faced my situation in solitude, the reality of my circumstances stark and unavoidable. The loneliness hit me like a physical blow, knocking the breath from my lungs. The man I had spent years building a life with, who I thought would always be by my side, had become my adversary, and here I was, fighting desperately to protect what remained of our family. Sharon called before bedtime, assuring me I wasn't alone and that everything would work out fine. Though grateful for her words, I understood that ultimately, this was my battle to fight. I had to face Keith, confront his lies, and accept the reality that our marriage had crumbled while I wasn't looking. As the trial date approached, I stood at the window that night, certain I was ready for whatever lay ahead. This was also my chance for a fresh start, something I had needed for longer than I cared to admit. The morning sun filtered through the curtains, heralding the day that would change my life forever. I felt a distinct hollowness in my stomach, not from fear, but from the uncertainty of facing the inevitable. Today in court, everything would be decided. As I got ready, I steeled myself to fight for my children and everything we had built together. This wasn't just about property, it was a battle for my future and the peace I so desperately craved. Sharon waited by the car, her face set with quiet determination that matched my own. Though we had fought storms together before, this battle felt different, more final somehow. Taking a deep breath and drawing strength from knowing I wasn't alone, we walked into the courthouse with our lawyer, our steps sure and steady. We were ready to face the truth, whatever it might bring.
The courtroom hung heavy with tension, like a powder keg waiting to explode, as Keith sat confidently beside Allison, their very presence a mockery of justice. Allison radiated an air of supreme confidence, as if the world itself bowed at her feet, her perfectly manicured hands folded demurely in her lap like a queen on her throne. Keith's face wore a smile of smug superiority, the kind that made Elizabeth's stomach turn with revulsion, a reminder of how far he had fallen from the man she once loved. To him, this day in court was merely a formality, a simple stepping stone toward discarding 20 years of marriage like yesterday's newspaper, his casual demeanor a final insult to the life they had built together.
Keith's lawyer spoke first, his arrogant tone cutting through the courtroom like a knife, already tasting victory. I watched as he painted Keith as a burdened family man, claiming he was being unfairly asked to divide what he had worked so hard to build. My stomach churned as the lawyer strutted before the judge, declaring that his client had been the family's financial backbone for years. When he dismissed my role, saying I had merely focused on housework and had no part in financial decisions, each word felt like a slap across my face. I bit my lip hard, fighting back the rage that threatened to explode as I was reduced to nothing more than an accessory in our marriage. Across the courtroom, Keith sat with his arms crossed, watching me with that smug expression I had grown to despise, treating this whole ordeal like some twisted game. I kept my eyes steady on the judge, refusing to show any weakness, even as my heart pounded in my chest. Then came our turn, and I felt a surge of hope as my lawyer rose calmly from his seat. I noticed Allison beginning to fidget as she sensed my lawyer's confidence, and I knew the moment had come to expose Keith's carefully constructed facade. My lawyer announced there was more evidence, presenting documents that proved Keith's fraudulent money transfers. The records clearly showed how he had moved funds to personal accounts, trying to hide them from me. I watched Keith's smile fade as he shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Though relief washed over me, when the evidence of his financial manipulation for his new life with Allison was revealed, I remained focused and alert. Keith's plan to leave me penniless was crumbling before everyone's eyes. My lawyer continued, methodically explaining how Keith had attempted to transfer assets to his new partner's name, concealing everything from his wife. The courtroom fell into a heavy silence that seemed to press against my ears. Keith's composed demeanor finally cracked as he gripped his chair arms, his confidence visibly draining away. I could see Allison staring at the documents with growing anxiety, her perfect world beginning to unravel. Then came the final blow. My lawyer revealed, with a slight smile, that Sharon had transferred assets into my name to protect me and the children. I watched as shock and disbelief washed over Keith's face as he realized his own mother had secretly acted to protect the wife he had betrayed. The silence in the courtroom was almost suffocating as Allison witnessed their carefully constructed castle of lies crumbling to dust. I watched as Keith, consumed by rage, leapt from his seat with an anguished cry that echoed through the courtroom. His face contorted with fury as he shouted about conspiracy and everyone being against him, his composure completely shattered. The judge's gavel came down hard on the bench as he sternly warned Keith that he would be removed if he couldn't control himself. Though Keith tried to regain his composure, it was too late. Like a house of cards, everything had already fallen apart. His carefully constructed plan lay in ruins before him, exposed for all to see. The judge carefully reviewed all the evidence, then delivered his verdict in a clear, unwavering voice. My heart nearly stopped as I heard the words I had been waiting for. The court ruled in my favor, granting me full rights to our assets and holding Keith financially responsible. I watched as Allison, without wasting a moment, shot Keith a look of pure contempt before walking out of the courtroom without a word, abandoning him just as I knew she would. Keith remained alone, slumped in his chair, all his previous arrogance replaced by the weight of defeat pressing down on his shoulders. I could see him watching helplessly as his life crumbled before his eyes, unable to stop what he himself had set in motion. My heart was still racing, but for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a deep sense of peace washing over me. What I had won that day wasn't just a legal victory, it was the return of my dignity and the freedom to live life on my own terms. This moment marked not just the end of a battle, but the beginning of my new life.
In his sparse apartment, Keith stared at the bare walls, the echoes of the courtroom still reverberating through his mind like a haunting melody. Once a man who had everything, a devoted wife, social prestige, and a promising future, he now sat alone, abandoned even by Allison, the woman for whom he had sacrificed it all. The empire he had so carefully constructed lay in ruins around him, the unfamiliar weight of failure crushing him with merciless force. All his luxuries, his arrogance, and what he had foolishly believed would be eternal pleasure had vanished like smoke in the wind, leaving nothing but bitter ashes. The courtroom had become the stage for his most humiliating defeat, a moment that would forever mark his fall from grace. The judge's words still rang in his ears, an inescapable reminder of his downfall. The court rules in favor of Elizabeth. Those powerful words had spelled the end of his schemes and the collapse of everything he had plotted. Elizabeth's serene face as the verdict was read remained etched in his memory, a constant reminder of his failure. He had expected to see her broken and defeated, but instead, she had risen with an inner strength he had never imagined she possessed. Allison, his supposed refuge from mundane married life, had wasted no time in deserting him. Without even a farewell, she had slammed the door on their relationship as decisively as she had walked out of the courtroom. She had left on the day of the trial, never looking back, never showing a moment's hesitation. She had realized that a future with Keith held no value now that his wealth and power were gone. Everything he had once offered, property, stability, influence, had evaporated in an instant like morning dew under a harsh sun. Now he sat alone, a king dethroned, a master of nothing. Rising from his chair, he surveyed his apartment, the stark contrast to his former life hitting him like a physical blow. Gone were the elegant restaurant dinners, the luxury cars, the admiring glances at social gatherings, all vanished like mirages in the desert. His friends, like Allison, had disappeared as if they had never existed, fair-weather companions who had melted away with his fortune. Loneliness had become his only faithful companion, sitting with him in the gathering darkness. He remembered the exact moment when everything had begun to unravel, like a loose thread that had undone his entire life. It was the moment when greed and ambition had blinded him, leading him down a path of no return. He had underestimated Elizabeth, believing he could manipulate her and take everything while leaving her with nothing. In his arrogance, he had thought she would never be an obstacle, that his coldness and calculated moves would keep him invincible. But he had missed the most crucial element in his careful calculations. Elizabeth's strength, like a diamond forged under pressure, had proven unbreakable. "It's all my fault," Keith whispered into the emptiness of his apartment, the weight of truth crushing him like an avalanche for the first time. The weeks following the trial became a blur of paperwork, foreclosures, and endless goodbyes, each one cutting deeper than the last. Even his mother Sharon, once his steadfast supporter, now regarded him with the same contempt he had shown Elizabeth, maintaining a deafening silence since that fateful day. His mother's eyes, filled with disappointment, served as mirrors reflecting everything he had lost, every treasure he had carelessly thrown away. Sinking into the threadbare second-hand sofa, his only furniture now, he stared at his silent phone like a man watching his last hope fade away. Every attempt to reclaim his past ended in bitter failure, like trying to catch smoke with bare hands. Allison, his former escape from reality, had vanished like morning mist, seeing no value in a man stripped of wealth and stability. Regret grew stronger with each passing day, wrapping around his heart like thorny vines. The deepest wound wasn't the loss of his wealth, but the destruction of the only genuine thing he'd ever had, his family, shattered by his own hands like a priceless vase carelessly dropped. Elizabeth had endured years of his manipulation and coldness, emerging stronger than he had ever imagined possible, like a diamond formed under pressure. Try as he might to silence the voices echoing in his mind, he couldn't erase the image of her walking out of the courthouse, dignity intact and head held high. She was no longer the malleable woman he had tried to control. While he sank into despair, she had risen to claim a new life for herself. "I destroyed everything," he murmured, the emptiness in his chest expanding like a black hole. As days turned into weeks, loneliness became his only faithful companion, following him like a shadow that never fades. The lights in his apartment went out early each night, just as the echoes of his past life gradually faded into silence. Calls to old friends went unanswered, and each attempt to rebuild his life only served to crush him further beneath the weight of reality's harsh judgment.
Meanwhile, I was moving forward with my life, like a butterfly emerging from its chrysalis. Finally free from the weight of Keith's presence, I was building a new life filled with possibilities I had never dared to imagine before. Sharon visited me frequently, and we had formed a bond that felt more like real family than the in-law relationship we once had, sharing quiet moments over coffee and watching the children grow.
From afar, Keith watched as the world he had once tried to control continued turning without him, like a play where he had been written out of the script. One afternoon, gazing through the window of his desolate apartment, the bitter truth finally crystallized in his mind like frost on glass. There was no going back. What he had lost could never be reclaimed, and the once powerful, arrogant man had become nothing more than a shadow trapped in a dim apartment, haunted by the echoes of his own betrayal. Perched on the edge of his bed, Keith stared at the bare walls, their emptiness reflecting the void in his soul. His days had become an endless chain of hollow moments, with ghosts of his past swirling around him like autumn leaves in a storm, refusing to settle. Everything he had once held dear had slipped through his fingers like sand, leaving him with nothing but himself. He had become a man imprisoned by his own despair, a king dethroned by his own hubris. The nights were the most unbearable, like a dark mirror forcing him to face his sins. Silence wrapped around him like a suffocating blanket, crushing him with its weight, leaving him alone with his torturous thoughts. He couldn't help but marvel at how quickly his life had crumbled, like a house of cards in a sudden breeze. Elizabeth, Allison, family, wealth, all had vanished like morning mist in the summer sun. Allison had left without a word, leaving him alone in this small, gloomy apartment that felt more like a cell than a home. The echoes of his failure rang in his head like a relentless bell. One day, while sorting through his meager remaining possessions, an unexpected letter arrived like a messenger from his past. His heart skipped a beat when he recognized Sharon's handwriting on the envelope, elegant yet somehow threatening. His pulse quickened not from joy, but from fear of what lay within those carefully folded pages. Since the trial, the silence between mother and son had stretched like an endless chasm, with no attempts at reconciliation from either side. The letter was brief, but its message cut like a blade. Sharon had made it crystal clear, she wanted nothing more to do with him. She wrote that her loyalty lay with Elizabeth and the grandchildren, and she could never support someone who had so cruelly betrayed his family. Keith let the letter fall to the table like a dead weight. A profound emptiness settled in his chest as he realized that even his last potential lifeline had been severed. That day, after reading Sharon's letter and trying to gather his scattered thoughts, Keith finally decided to do what he had been contemplating for weeks. He would write to Elizabeth, one last time. Though uncertain whether she would read it or find any meaning in his words, he felt compelled to put his feelings on paper. He picked up a pen and began to write, his hand trembling slightly. The words came slowly at first, each one feeling heavier than lead on the pristine white paper. Though he knew nothing could undo what he had done, he desperately wanted to convey his remorse to Elizabeth. "I betrayed you," he began, the words stark and honest on the page. "I know there are no words or actions that can erase the past, but I truly regret everything. I've lost my family, and now I'm alone. I underestimated you and lost everything before I realized what I had." He sealed the letter and placed it on the table, unsure if he would find the courage to send it. The truth was, Elizabeth didn't need his apologies, they were like offering a band-aid for a wound that had already healed. She had proven she could move forward without him, building a new life from the ashes of their marriage. And that, perhaps, was what hurt Keith the most, the realization that he had become nothing more than a cautionary tale in her story of triumph.
while going about my daily life, I remained completely unaware of Keith's suffering, like ships passing in the night. After his betrayal, I had found an unexpected peace, something I never thought possible in the aftermath of such heartbreak. Sharon's unwavering support had become my anchor, essential for healing my wounded heart. She visited regularly to see her grandchildren, and our bond had grown deeper than I ever imagined possible. Never did I expect my mother-in-law to become my strongest ally, but life has a way of surprising us, with its unexpected turns. One afternoon, as we sat on the terrace sipping coffee, Sharon began talking about a letter, her eyes fixed thoughtfully on her cup. She confessed that she had written to Keith, her voice carrying the weight of maternal pain. She told me she had informed him that she would no longer maintain contact with him. I watched her quietly, studying the familiar lines of determination in her face. Though I had committed to moving forward, any news about Keith still stirred a complex mixture of emotions within me, like waves disturbing still waters. I understood Sharon's heartache over her son's choices, but I also recognized the necessity of her decision to sever ties. When I asked how she thought he had taken it, my question stemmed not from mere curiosity but from a need to know how far he had fallen. Sharon sighed deeply, telling me there had been no response, but she imagined it wasn't easy for him. It was his choice that led to her choice. I felt overwhelming gratitude for Sharon's constant presence in my life, like a lighthouse in the storm. Together, we had weathered numerous challenges, and though we were each rebuilding our lives in our own way, we shared a common purpose. Our shared mission was to protect the children and find peace amid the chaos. That night, as I tucked the children into bed, I found myself wondering if Keith would try to contact me again. Though I knew he was completely alone now, I felt no pity for him. My heart had hardened like clay in the sun. His arrogance had led him down this dark path, and that was his burden to bear. Still, I sometimes caught myself wondering what might have been if he had made different choices. Later, while reading in the living room, the doorbell jolted me back to reality. Opening the door, I found an envelope at my feet, like a ghost from the past. When I recognized Keith's handwriting, a mixture of surprise and weariness washed over me. I hesitated to read it, but curiosity won out, and I opened the envelope. His words were a testament to his desperation, like a drowning man's last grasp at air. He wrote about regret and loneliness, about losing everything he once held dear. Yet after reading it, I felt nothing, as if reading about a stranger's life. No anger stirred, no sadness welled up, no sympathy emerged from my heart. There was only a quiet acceptance, like the stillness after a storm. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my desk drawer, closing another chapter of my past. I knew this was my final goodbye to Keith, like closing the last chapter of a well-worn book. He no longer had a place in my life, and while he carried his regrets, I chose not to harbor hatred, letting it float away like autumn leaves in the wind. Sitting back on the sofa, watching my children sleep, I felt that everything truly precious to me was right there in that moment. Though I had lost a marriage, I had gained something far more valuable, my freedom. As time passed, I felt the burden of the past few months gradually lifting from my shoulders, like heavy winter clothes being shed in spring. The scars Keith had left ran deep, but they had become part of my history, no longer bleeding into my present. Sharon's frequent visits and my children's love reminded me daily that I had made the right choice, like constant rays of sunshine breaking through clouds. I had emerged from the chaos Keith left behind and built a life filled with new possibilities. Sharon had become my rock, visiting weekly for coffee and to see the children, her presence as comforting as a warm blanket on a cold night. Between us had grown something more than an in-law relationship, a genuine bond that felt like it had always been there. What was once a formal mother-in-law and daughter-in-law relationship had transformed into a small, close-knit family, supporting each other with quiet understanding. One afternoon, while preparing snacks for the children, an unexpected envelope arrived. My heart skipped a beat when I recognized Keith's handwriting, like seeing a ghost from the past. Though months had passed without contact and I thought I had filed him away with my past, that envelope brought back unresolved feelings like waves washing up on shore. I sat down carefully and began reading my ex-husband's words. The tone of his letter was different this time, no excuses, no attempts to gain sympathy. Instead, Keith wrote about his loneliness, his genuine regret, and the things he only understood after losing everything. His letter began with a simple "I'm sorry." He went on to acknowledge that while he couldn't change the past, he wanted me to know how deeply he understood his betrayal, how he had undervalued and hurt me, and that he was now paying the price for his choices. Finishing the letter, I frowned but felt neither anger nor sadness stirring in my heart. What I felt instead was a peace I had never known before, like the calm after a long storm. The man who wrote this was just a shadow of the Keith I once knew, defeated by his own mistakes. His words of regret seemed genuine, but for me, they came too late, like trying to save a flower that had already wilted. I tucked the letter away in my desk drawer, with no intention of responding. Not because I didn't care, but because that door had already closed naturally, like the end of a season. Keith belonged to my past now, and the future was mine alone to shape. Later that afternoon, Sharon visited as usual, wearing her gentle smile. She looked like someone who knew she had done the right thing, radiating a quiet confidence that came with wisdom. As I poured coffee, I mentioned Keith's letter to Sharon, my voice deliberately neutral and steady like still water. Sharon paused for a moment but maintained her composure, asking casually what he had written. I shrugged and told her that he expressed regret and remorse for his betrayal, though the words felt hollow in my mouth. I added that nothing would change, my voice carrying the weight of certainty. Sharon nodded, understanding written across her face like an open book. We both knew Keith's regret had come too late, like winter flowers, trying to bloom in spring. I was different now, stronger, more confident, like a tree that had weathered a storm and grown deeper roots. Keith could try all he wanted, but there was no longer room for him in my life, like a chapter in a book that had already been closed. Sharon looked at the children playing in the garden and mused about life's strange ways. She said everything had turned out exactly as it should, her words carrying the wisdom of years. I smiled peacefully, knowing in my heart that she was right. Though the journey had been painful and filled with betrayal, everything now felt like it had fallen into place, like pieces of a complex puzzle. What I had gained was worth far more than any property or legal victory. I had found inner peace, a gift more precious than gold. As time flowed on, I continued building my new life, like a painter creating on a fresh canvas. I found stable work and cherished the time with my children, watching joy bloom in our daily lives like flowers in a garden. The shadows of Keith and his betrayal rarely darkened my thoughts anymore, fading like old photographs in sunlight. One day, walking in the park with Lucas and Amelia, I realized just how far I had come, like a traveler looking back at a distant shore. The burdens of the past had melted away, leaving room for what truly mattered, my children, peace, and the future we were building together. The man who had once been my entire world had become nothing more than a distant memory, no longer holding power to bind or define me. Sharon remained a vital part of our lives, visiting her grandchildren regularly and sharing in our simple but warm family moments. These times reminded me that family isn't always about blood, it's about the people who choose to stay, like stars that form their own constellation. Sharon had chosen us, and together we had become a family bound by respect and love rather than mere obligation. Though echoes of Keith's past still lingered, I no longer heard them as pain but as distant reminders of how far I'd come. I had learned to overcome betrayal, forgive myself, and let go of mistakes that were never mine to carry. Now, I faced forward, like a compass pointing true north. Life was offering me new chances, and I was ready to embrace them with both hands, like catching morning light. Watching my children run through the park, I took a deep breath, feeling fresh air fill my lungs like new hope. The future is mine, and though the path had been rocky, I know with certainty that every step has been worth it.
If this story of love, betrayal, and redemption has touched your heart, We invite you to join us for more compelling tales filled with unexpected twists and profound life lessons. Share your thoughts in the comments below and let us know how Elizabeth's journey of strength and renewal resonated with you. Help others discover this moving story by sharing it with friends and family who might find comfort and inspiration in these words. Until our next episode, where more stories of courage and transformation await, please subscribe and show your support with a like.